What happens when a beloved British icon walks into what should have been a friendly daytime television chat, only to face the most brutal public humiliation of his career? In just 36 seconds, one shocking comment would turn Sir Cliff Richard from gracious guest to defending victim, and transform Denise Welch from television host into the most hated woman in Britain. The ITV studios hummed with their usual midday energy as Sir Cliff Richard made his way through the corridors toward the Loose Women's set. At 73 years old, the legendary singer had agreed to appear on the show to discuss his upcoming tour and his decade-spanning career. What he walked into that Tuesday afternoon would become one of the most shocking moments in British television history. Cliff settled into the guest chair, his trademark smile warm and genuine as he greeted the panel. Denise Welch sat center stage as the lead presenter, flanked by Nadia Sawalha, Linda Robson, and Kay Adams. The atmosphere should have been welcoming, celebratory even. Instead, there was something cold in Denise's eyes from the very first moment. "So, Cliff," Denise began, her voice carrying an edge that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably. "Here you are again, still performing at your age. Don't you think it's time to hang up the microphone and let someone younger take the spotlight?" The question hit like a slap. Cliff's smile faltered for just a moment before he composed himself with the grace of a true professional. "Well, Denise, I think as long as people want to hear me sing and I'm physically able to do it, age is just a number. Music doesn't have an expiry date," he replied, his voice steady but clearly taken aback by the aggressive opening. Nadia Sawalha looked visibly uncomfortable, glancing between Denise and Cliff with concern written across her face. "I think what's amazing is how you've maintained your voice and your passion for so many years," she interjected, trying to steer the conversation toward more positive territory. But Denise wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. "That's all very romantic, Nadia, but let's be honest here. Cliff, your last few albums have been commercial disasters. The charts are dominated by artists who weren't even born when you started. Isn't this just about ego at this point?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. Linda Robson's mouth actually dropped open in shock. Kay Adams shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. Cliff straightened in his chair, his decades of media training kicking in. "I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with you there, Denise. My fans, many of whom have supported me for 50 years, still come to my concerts. They still buy my music. I'm not sure what commercial disasters you're referring to." "Oh, come on," Denise shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Your last studio album barely cracked the top 50. You're living in the past, clinging to glory days that frankly weren't that glorious to begin with." The audience began to murmur. Some people were actually gasping at the sheer rudeness of the attack. Cliff's face flushed slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "Denise, I came here today to talk about my upcoming tour and to connect with the viewers who have been so supportive over the years. I'm not sure why you're choosing to attack me personally rather than have a conversation." "Attack you?" Denise laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm just asking the questions that everyone's thinking. When you look in the mirror, do you really see a relevant artist? Or do you see an old man desperately trying to recapture something that's long gone?" Nadia Sawalha couldn't stay silent any longer. "Denise, I think you're being incredibly unfair. Sir Cliff is a legend who's given joy to millions of people across generations." "Oh, please, Nadia," Denise snapped, turning her venom toward her colleague for a moment. "Just because someone's old doesn't make them a legend. Half the people watching probably don't even know who he is." Cliff's composure was beginning to crack, not from anger but from sheer disbelief at the unprofessional treatment he was receiving. "I have to say, in all my years of television appearances, I've never been spoken to quite like this. I'm not sure what I've done to deserve this level of hostility." "Hostility?" Denise's voice was getting louder now. "This is called honest journalism, Cliff. Maybe you're just not used to it because everyone usually fawns all over you." Linda Robson finally found her voice. "Denise, I think we should move on to talking about the tour dates. Our viewers would love to hear about that." But Denise was on a roll now, seemingly energized by Cliff's obvious discomfort. "You know what really bothers me about performers like you? You take up space that could go to new talent. You've had your time. Why can't you just gracefully exit and let fresh voices be heard?" The words hung in the air like poison. Cliff sat back in his chair, his face pale now. The man who had entertained millions, who had given decades of his life to bringing joy through music, looked genuinely hurt. "I think," Cliff said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "that every artist deserves to be treated with basic respect, regardless of their age or where they are in their career. I've never tried to block anyone's path or take opportunities from younger artists. Kay Adams finally spoke up, her voice tight with embarrassment. Sir Cliff, perhaps we could talk about your charitable work instead. You've raised millions for various causes over the years. Oh yes, the charity angle, Denise interrupted before Cliff could respond. Another way to stay relevant, isn't it? Nothing like a bit of public generosity to keep your name in the papers when the music isn't doing it anymore. That was the moment everything changed. The studio audience erupted. What had started as uncomfortable murmuring exploded into audible gasps and shocked exclamations. Someone in the back row actually shouted, "That's disgusting," at Denise's vicious attack on Cliff's charitable work. Cliff's face went from pale to flushed red. For the first time in the interview, his famous composure completely cracked. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice shaking with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "My charitable work? Are you seriously suggesting that helping sick children and supporting various causes is just a publicity stunt? Do you have any idea how offensive that is?" Nadia Sawalha looked absolutely horrified. She turned to Denise with fire in her eyes. "Denise, you've gone way too far. Sir Cliff has genuinely helped countless people. How dare you question his motives for giving back?" "I'll question whatever I like," Denise shot back, her face twisted with an ugly sneer. "This is my show, and if Cliff can't handle a few hard questions, maybe he shouldn't be here." "Hard questions?" Linda Robson's voice was rising now, her usual calm demeanor completely shattered. "These aren't questions, Denise. This is just cruel. You're being absolutely vile to a guest who came here in good faith." Denise whipped around to face Linda, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare tell me how to do my job, Linda. I'm not here to stroke egos and throw softball questions at has-beens." The word has-been hit Cliff like a physical blow. He actually recoiled in his chair, his mouth opening in shock. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak at all. Kay Adams stood up from her chair, something that never happened during a live broadcast. Her voice was shaking with anger. "Denise, I cannot sit here and watch you humiliate a guest like this. Sir Cliff, on behalf of the show, I am deeply sorry for this treatment." "Sit down, Kay," Denise commanded, her voice ice cold. "Don't apologize for me doing what real journalists should do." "Real journalists?" Cliff finally found his voice, and for the first time there was steel in it. "Real journalists ask probing questions, yes, but they don't attack people personally. They don't mock someone's charity work. They don't try to destroy someone's dignity for entertainment." The audience began to applaud. It started with just a few people, but quickly grew until nearly the entire studio was clapping for Cliff's words. The sound seemed to infuriate Denise even more. "Oh, playing the victim now?" she sneered, raising her voice over the applause. The great Sir Cliff Richard, reduced to playing for sympathy from a daytime television audience. That was the moment Cliff stood up. The 73-year-old legend rose from his chair with quiet dignity, his face set in an expression of profound disappointment. The studio fell completely silent. Even the cameramen seemed to hold their breath. "I have been in this business for over 50 years, Cliff said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I have been interviewed by some of the toughest journalists in the world. I have faced difficult questions about my career, my personal life, everything. But I have never, ever been treated with such unprofessional cruelty as I have been today." Denise opened her mouth to interrupt, but Cliff held up his hand. "I'm not finished," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "You have questioned my relevance, mocked my age, dismissed my music, and worst of all, suggested that my charitable work is nothing more than a publicity stunt. You have shown complete contempt not just for me, but for the millions of fans who have supported me throughout my career." The other panelists sat transfixed. Nadia had tears in her eyes. Linda was nodding vigorously. Kay was still standing, her arms crossed in defiance of Denise's earlier command. "I came here today to share my joy about returning to the stage," Cliff went on, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio. "I came to talk about the upcoming tour that thousands of people are excited about. I came to connect with viewers who might enjoy hearing some stories from my career. Instead, I find myself having to defend not just my music, but my very right to exist as an artist." "Are you quite finished with your little speech?" Denise interrupted, but her voice had lost some of its earlier venom. The audience reaction seemed to be getting to her. Cliff looked directly into her eyes. "You know what saddens me most about this, Denise? It's not the personal attacks. I've survived much worse than anything you could throw at me. What saddens me is that somewhere out there, a young artist might be watching this, and they might think that this is how people in this industry treat each other, that this kind of cruelty is acceptable. The audience erupted in applause again, louder than before. Some people were actually standing up and cheering. In the control room, the producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to a commercial break. Denise's face was getting redder by the minute. The audience's support for Cliff was clearly not what she had expected. Well, if you're so upset about being challenged, maybe you should stick to playing to your little fan clubs where everyone tells you how wonderful you are. There it is again, Cliff said sadly. The contempt, not just for me, but for the people who enjoy my music. You're not just attacking me, Denise. You're attacking every person who has ever found joy in a song I've sung. You're dismissing their feelings, their memories, their experiences as worthless. Nadia Sawalha couldn't contain herself any longer. She turned to face the cameras directly. I want to say to everyone watching at home that this does not represent the values of this show or this panel. Sir Cliff Richard is a gentleman and a legend, and he deserves so much better than this. Nadia, you're out of line, Denise snapped, but her authority was crumbling by the minute. No, said Linda Robson, also turning to the camera. Nadia is absolutely right. This is disgraceful, and I'm ashamed to be associated with it. Cliff looked around at the three women who had tried to defend him, his expression softening slightly. Thank you, ladies. Your kindness means more than you know, but I think it's clear that I'm not welcome here. He began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and dignified. The simple act seemed to electrify the studio. The audience was on the edge of their seats, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Running away? Denise called out, making one final attempt to regain control. I thought you were supposed to be tougher than this, Cliff. Cliff paused, the microphone halfway off. He looked at Denise with something approaching pity. Tougher than this? Cliff repeated slowly, his voice heavy with disappointment. Denise, I've survived 5 decades in an industry that can be brutal. I've weathered personal attacks, professional setbacks, and public scrutiny that would break most people. But I've never confused cruelty with strength, and I've never mistaken bullying for toughness. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the cameras humming. Every person in that room knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Cliff Richard, the ultimate professional, the man who had never lost his temper in public, was delivering a masterclass in dignity under fire. Real toughness, Cliff continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, is treating people with respect even when you disagree with them. Real strength is lifting others up, not tearing them down. What you've done here today isn't tough, Denise. It's just sad. Denise's face went pale, then flushed red again. The audience's reaction was clearly rattling her more than she wanted to admit. Don't you dare lecture me about strength. You don't know anything about what I've been through. You're right, Cliff replied quietly. I don't know your struggles, just as you clearly don't know mine. But I would never use someone else's pain as an excuse to inflict pain on others. That's the difference between us. The cameras caught every emotion flickering across Denise's face. Anger, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like shame. The other panelists watched in stunned silence as their colleagues' mask of professional authority completely slipped away. Kay Adams stepped closer to Cliff. Sir Cliff, please don't let this experience taint your view of our show or our network. This isn't who we are. I know it isn't, Kay, Cliff said gently, his natural kindness shining through even in this moment of crisis. You three have shown me nothing but grace today. It's clear that this behavior doesn't represent the values you hold dear. Linda Robson was openly crying now. I'm so sorry, Sir Cliff. You deserve so much better than this. We all do. The audience began to murmur again, but this time it wasn't shock or gasps. It was a low rumble of agreement and support for Cliff. Someone shouted, "We love you, Cliff," from the back of the studio. Denise seemed to realize that she was losing the room completely. In desperation, she made one final, catastrophic attempt to regain control. Well, at least when I'm forgotten, it'll be because I stood for something real, not because I spent my whole career singing lightweight pop songs that meant nothing to anyone. The words hit the studio like a bomb. The audience reaction was immediate and explosive. People weren't just gasping anymore. They were shouting. Several audience members stood up, pointing accusingly at Denise. One woman yelled, "How dare you?" so loudly that it echoed through the studio. But it was Cliff's reaction that truly stunned everyone. Instead of anger or hurt, his face showed something much more powerful. Profound disappointment mixed with genuine pity. "Denise," he said softly, his voice somehow carrying over the chaos, "I genuinely feel sorry for you. To live with that much bitterness, that much need to tear down others, it must be exhausting. The simplicity of his response, the complete absence of retaliation, seemed to deflate Denise entirely. She looked around the studio, taking in the hostile faces in the audience, the disappointed expressions of her colleagues, and the cameras that had captured every moment of her professional self-destruction. Nadia Sawalha stood up and walked over to Cliff. "Sir Cliff, would you please accept my personal apology and the apology of everyone who believes in treating guests with dignity and respect?" "Of course I do, Nadia. Your kindness throughout this ordeal has been a bright spot in a very dark moment." The audience erupted in applause for Nadia's gesture. The sound was deafening, a clear statement of where their sympathies lay. Denise sat alone at the presenter's desk, isolated and humiliated. Cliff looked one more time around the studio, taking in the faces of the audience members, many of whom were still clapping. He raised his hand in a gentle wave, and the applause grew even louder. To everyone watching at home, he said, speaking directly to the cameras, "Please remember that kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Don't let anyone convince you that cruelty is strength or that tearing others down builds you up. We can do so much better than that." With those words, he turned and walked toward the exit. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that shook the studio. The three remaining panelists joined in the applause, their faces showing a mixture of admiration for Cliff and shame for their colleagues' behavior. As Cliff reached the edge of the set, he paused and looked back one more time, not at Denise, but at the audience who had supported him through the ordeal. He placed his hand over his heart in a gesture of gratitude that brought many people to tears. Denise sat frozen at the desk, watching as the man she had tried to humiliate walked away with his dignity, not just intact, but somehow enhanced. The camera stayed on her face as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. She had expected to be the tough interviewer who exposed a faded star. Instead, she had revealed herself to be everything that was wrong with modern media. The studio fell into an awkward silence as Cliff disappeared from view. The three remaining panelists looked at each other, then at Denise, then at the audience. Nobody seemed to know what to do next. Finally, Kay Adams spoke into the deafening quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break. When we return, we'll be discussing the importance of treating each other with respect and dignity." As the cameras cut away and the show went to commercial, the audience continued to buzz with conversation about what they had just witnessed. Many people were shaking their heads in disbelief. Others were openly discussing how disgusted they were with Denise's behavior. In those final moments before the break, the cameras caught one last image that would be replayed countless times in the days to come. Denise Welch sitting alone at the presenter's desk, her head in her hands, while the empty chair where Sir Cliff Richard had sat stood as a monument to dignity in the face of cruelty. The man who had walked into that studio as a beloved entertainer had walked out as something more, a symbol of grace under pressure, of kindness in the face of malice, and of the truth that real strength comes not from tearing others down, but from lifting yourself up.